The ingredients needed for soft pretzels are fairly basic. We'll need flour. Bread flour is preferred, but you can also make this recipe with all-purpose flour if that's what you happen to have on hand. We'll need a little bit of sugar, salt, active dry yeast, and then for the second part of our recipe, we'll need kosher salt and baking soda. The equipment that we will use to make our pretzels are liquid and dry measuring cups, measuring spoons, and a straight edge spatula. We're also going to need a thermometer that has been properly calibrated. We're going to utilize the stand mixer to make this recipe, but you would not have to have a stand mixer. You could start the mixing part in a regular mixing bowl and use a wooden spoon instead of the paddle attachment, which we will use at the beginning. And then the kneading would simply happen on the counter or a pastry board with a push, fold, turn motion for the amount of time stated, but instead we are going to use the dough hook with our stand mixer. And then eventually for the second part of our recipe, we will need a saucepan, a slotted spoon, and a baking sheet. To begin making our pretzels, one of the first things we have to do is measure a quarter cup of water to dissolve our yeast in. And I'm going to put that directly into my mixing bowl. Every time I have to move ingredients, I can lose a little bit of the ingredients. And I want to make sure everything gets in there as best as possible. So we'll start out with it in there and then we'll add to that bowl. And since I'm going to use the stand mixer, I'm going to go ahead and start with it in that stand mixing bowl. Now before I put the water in there, after I measure it in my liquid measuring cup, I need to test the temperature with a thermometer. So I need a reliable quick read thermometer. And if it's not quite the temperature that I need when I get it out of the faucet, if it's too cool, then I'm gonna heat it up in the microwave in small increments of just a few seconds at a time. My first measurement of my water coming out of the sink is only about 80 degrees. So I'm gonna put this in the microwave for about 9 seconds and check it again. According to my recipe, I need the temperature of my water to be between 105 and 115 degrees Fahrenheit. And it is really important that I get the water temperature right when I'm making a yeast bread recipe like these pretzels are. Particularly if the liquid is too hot, it'll kill the yeast and the bread won't be able to rise, the recipe won't rise. If it's too cold, the yeast is going to have a difficult time activating and our recipe won't rise. So I'm only reading about 100 degrees, so I'm going to put this back in for about 5 or 6 seconds and check it again. So I've put my water back in the microwave for a few more seconds, and I'm checking the temperature again. It's important when I check the temperature that I don't let the tip of the thermometer touch the glass, because I want the temperature of the liquid, not the temperature of the glass. And to have it more submerged in the liquid, since it's such a shallow, small amount, I'm tipping the glass to bring it more to one location. And this is still showing a really cool temperature. So I'm going to go ahead and microwave it for a few more seconds. After that last microwave time in the microwave, my water measured about 111 degrees. So now I'm going to sprinkle my tablespoon of active dry yeast on top of my water. And I'm going to dissolve that by stirring with a rubber scraper until I don't see any large chunks of yeast. Just dissolve it in the liquid. Just gently stir. Nothing on the bowl, nothing on the scraper, and we'll be ready for the next step at that point. So now that I've dissolved the yeast in that first quarter cup of water, The next step is to add 1 more cup of water. And again, I'm testing that temperature just before adding. It has to be the temperature listed on the recipe right as I add it to the remaining ingredients. And right now, this particular cup of water is measuring about 110, 111 degrees. So that's perfect. I'm going to go ahead and add that and stir that in. And then I need to add my salt and sugar, which I've measured, and stir those in. That's a teaspoon of salt and a pinch of sugar. And now the next thing I need is 1 cup of flour. So I'm going to use a smaller flour, a smaller dry measuring cup as a scoop. And I'm going to measure my flour. Just kind of stir this around because it's been sitting in the bag. I don't use bread flour as often, so I tend to keep it in the refrigerator between uses if you don't have an airtight container. So I've spooned it in over the top. Now I've leveled it off, so that's my first cup. And my recipe calls for 3 to 4 cups. And I will know how much I need by how the dough feels. So the dough is going to tell me how much flour I should put in. But I want to get at least 3 and try not to go over 4. So I've put my flat beater on. I've got my bowl secured. And now for this particular mixer, I bring the bowl up to meet the beater. And I'm just stirring. So I'm just going to put it on a low speed. And then while that's running, I'm going to go ahead and measure cup number 2. Once this first cup is mostly mixed in, I'll add cup number 2. And then I want to get 1 more cup in here before we talk about kneading. So again, if I did not have a stand mixer, and that is a heavy, when I say stand mixer, I mean a heavy duty stand mixer like the KitchenAid brand that I have here. Most mixers, a bread dough could destroy the motor. So if it's not a heavy duty. So we've got 2 cups mixed in pretty well. There's cup number 3. And I'm going to go ahead and measure cup number 4 and have it on standby. So what we're looking for is for it to lose its stickiness and leave the sides of the bowl, which you can see it's doing pretty well. Okay, so it's all together as a ball of dough. And again, I would just be doing this with a wooden spoon in a mixing bowl if I didn't have the stand mixer. But the stand mixer does make it super easy to make a yeast bread. So at this point, if I were doing this by hand without the mixer, I would put my dough on a lightly floured surface, counter, pastry board, clean table, and I would knead it for 5 to 10 minutes. Because I'm using the stand mixer, I'm going to change my attachment instead. So you could really convert just about any yeast bread recipe to the stand mixer if you just know what keywords in the recipe tell you to change the attachments on your mixer. So we start out with the paddle attachment to bring the ingredients together initially. And then we are going to switch to the dough hook when it says to turn it out onto a lightly floured surface. And then we're going to bring that bowl back up to meet the attachment. And just like we would sprinkle and add flour to our pastry board or our counter if we were kneading this by hand, we are going to add it slowly to this dough as it kneads. We will need to pause periodically and check the texture of the dough. You do not want to do that during the kneading process or you could get hurt. So again, a low speed. I'm going to set a timer. And this is still a really loose dough, so I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle some of that flour in. I'm going to pause my mixing just for a second. Scrape my bowl. Loosen any ingredients from the side so they get into the ball of dough. And resume kneading. So you can see it's really come together better. I'm going to check the dough and see if it's sticky, and it's not sticky, so I'm not going to add flour. I'm going to check the texture. So it's tacky. It feels not dry, which is good. We don't want it to be all dried out, but it's not really sticking to my hands. Maybe just a little bit. So I'll just do a light dusting again. Put the bowl back in place. And then turn it back on to finish that 8 to 10 minutes of kneading time. All right, we've reached the 8-minute mark. So I'm going to check this, and my dough has a nice smooth texture. Notice it is a little sticky. It's coming off on my fingers. So I'm going to go ahead and add just a little more flour today while it finishes the last minute or so of kneading. Now that I've got that last bit of flour worked in, I'm going to go ahead and check my dough one more time. And it's just tacky. It's not dried out. It's not really sticky, but it doesn't feel all dry. So that's perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and prepare the bag to put this in overnight. So if I were making my pretzel dough and pretzels in the same day, I would simply put my dough into a greased bowl, flip it once, cover it with a towel, and place it in a warm, dry spot of my kitchen to rise for an hour to 2 hours until doubled in size. But I'm going to do this a little bit differently, and we're going to do a cool rise overnight. So I'm going to hold it in a gallon freezer bag. And to make sure it doesn't stick to the bag, I'm going to put a little bit of cooking spray in there. But I don't want to overdo it. I don't want big puddles of cooking spray, yet I want the cooking spray everywhere in the bag. So to make sure it's everywhere, I'm just going to smush the bag around, move the corners to the cooking spray that I already have in there. If you do overspray a little and you see big puddles, you can just use a paper towel to clean it out. But now I've got the cooking spray everywhere in my bag. So I'm going to take that finished dough, just let it form a nice ball, and I'm going to place that into my bag. Now, the water temperature is probably, or the liquid temperature is one of the first most important things in a yeast bread recipe. The second is the kneading. If I don't knead this enough, my dough is not going to be able to do what it needs to do at the next step. So what's going to happen here is why I'm squeezing out all this excess, all the air in the bag, is because while my dough rises, it's going to produce, the yeast is going to produce carbon dioxide. By kneading the dough, I've developed enough structure for that carbon dioxide to get trapped, and that's what causes my dough to rise. So it's going to actually fill this bag as well. So that's why I made sure to squeeze all the excess air out, so that when it fills what's out, gets outside of the dough itself into the bag, my bag won't burst. If that happens, my dough will dry out, and I won't know it till I go to work with it the next day, and I'll have to throw away all the dried out parts of the dough. So I have to knead it just right, because if I don't knead it enough, there won't be enough structure developed to trap the carbon dioxide. And if I overdo it, there'll be so much structure that the carbon dioxide won't be powerful enough to really push those walls of the dough out to cause it to rise. So our water temperature and our kneading have to be just right in order for this dough to come out correctly. So now, like I said, I'm going to do a cool rise, which means I'm going to put this in the refrigerator. It's going to go in there overnight. It could go up to 48 hours and still successfully be made into pretzels. This is what my dough looks like after it's cool rise overnight in the refrigerator. You can see that lots of carbon dioxide was produced, that the dough is about 2 times the quantity that we put into this bag yesterday. And if you recall, we squeezed all that extra air out. And now you can see why that was so important to do, because of all the carbon dioxide that was produced from the fermentation of the yeast while this proofed. So when you leave a dough to rise, that's called proofing. So we're going to take our dough and we're going to try to work without flour. So I'm going to take it out of the bag. I'm going to take my dough out of the bag. And this recipe makes 8 to 10 pretty nice sized pretzels. 8 is my preference. But if you are trying to serve 5 people, then having 2 apiece and making it 10 is a lot nicer. So I'm just going to push this down a couple of times. Get this to a shape I can kind of divide evenly. So in order to divide my pretzel into 8, I'm going to use my bench scraper. And first I'm just going to score. So about a halfway, about in the middle, and then about the middle of each of those. And then we'll go down the center. And that'll give me 8 pretty close to even pieces. If I wanted to be exact, I would weigh each portion, I'd weigh the entire thing on a scale, divide by the number of portions I wanted to create, and then weigh out 8 or 10 equally sized portions. So most of these I'm going to set to the side. I'm going to work with one at a time generally. And again, I'm hoping to not use flour. If it's a little tacky or a little sticky, that's okay. I'm going to take this first piece, and just each piece, when I start, I'm going to knead it a couple of times. And then I'm going to begin to roll it, sort of like when you were a kid and worked with Play-Doh. And I'll push my hands out from the center to help lengthen the rope of dough. We want to get this somewhere between 12 and 18 inches long, but we want to keep a nice even circumference across the entire rope of dough. If you find that your dough shrinks back really quickly, you can set it aside and start to work with another one. Let it rest, and then pick it back up and continue to work with it. So that you can get it to the length that you need to get the pretzel shape. Once we have that nice long piece of pretzel rope, we're going to take that dough and create a U shape. And then from that U shape, we're going to make an X at the top and press. We're going to cross that X again and press. And then we're going to fold that down and press the ends. Voila, pretzel shape. So I'm just going to set this over closer to my saucepan of soda water and let that sit for just a couple minutes before I put it in the water. So then I'm going to, again, that's the U shape. Cross it towards the top like an X. Press, double that cross. Press again, fold down, press again, and you have that pretzel shape. So now as I make the rest of these into pretzel shapes, I'll set them by the pan, and then I'll be ready to put them in the water for that next step. One other thing that I want to do before I put any pretzels into the gentle boil soda water is I want to make sure that the baking pan is ready for the oven. So notice I have a cookie sheet, no sides, so that lets the air circulate well to all parts of my pretzel. And I'm just going to simply grease this with cooking spray so that they don't stick to the pan after they're baked. Now that my water has reached a nice rolling simmer, I'm going to place a pretzel into the water, and I need to make sure that it stays under the water for a minimum of 30 seconds. It is this soda bath, this mixture of baking soda and water, that gives the pretzel its characteristic color. So I'm just gonna hold the pretzel under the water with my slotted spoon, making sure that it gets covered in the soda water for at least 30 seconds. And then when I'm ready, I'll move it to my greased baking sheet. You can work with as many pretzels at a time as your pan can fit without the pretzels running into each other. You'll notice the pretzels do expand slightly in the pan. I'm just going to tap off that excess water and move my pretzel over to my baking sheet. And while the pretzel is still wet, I'm going to sprinkle salt on. It won't work if I let the pretzel get dry. And my water is ready for the next pretzel. And I'll repeat this process until they're all on the baking sheet. Now that all 8 pretzels are on our baking sheet, we're ready to place them in the preheated 475-degree oven for 12 minutes or until brown like bread. Here are our pretzels, fresh from the oven with that nice brown pretzel color. Again, that came from the soda bath. If you wanted a darker brown, you would simply leave your pretzel in the soda bath longer, and that would create a darker color. So now these fresh home-baked soft pretzels are ready to serve and enjoy. Couple of notes about our soft baked pretzels. Number one, they are best enjoyed warm and on the day that they're baked. So keep that in mind when choosing the time to prepare your final steps for your pretzels. Also, they are delicious all on their own, or they're also quite yummy dipped in nacho cheese or cream cheese, or even a simple mustard.